Greetings all, and welcome to the fourth segment of A Traveler's Guide 2 for Aether. And today we'll be continuing with a look at the planet in this next segment, A Traveler's Guide to the Sanctuary Fortress. Founded by the Luminoth E-Bitter, who died in hand-to-hand combat at the age of nearly 5 centicycles during the first Ing attacks on Aether, the Sanctuary Fortress was the only serious technological fortress built by the Luminoth, preferring to live as the Chozo chose to, amongst the wonders of nature and away from the technology that had given the name meaning in ancient times. Even so, this fortress was built to serve as a monitoring station for the other parts of Aether, and thus was their best way of gathering intelligence on the land and eventually the Ing. The Sanctuary Fortress is filled to the brim with an assortment of machines that have been designed by the Luminoth but turned against their creators as a result of the influence of the Ing. The absence of living creatures in the land more than shows the extreme technological marvels the race was capable of, and its residents did not go down without a fight, as the Sanctuary Temple, the warrior heroes Seaput and the Temple's guardian O'Lear were the very last to fall to the forces of the Ing. The Sanctuary Fortress lived out its namesake for a long time, but now that the war has ended and the land is now free of the darkness of the Ing, it is possible that it may yet again serve its original purpose once more. It is lastly noted that this was the area where the Hunter was forced to fight and kill the Spider Guardian and fought against Dark Sabbaths for the second time in a journey on Aether. As far as can be spoken on previously covered organisms, the Sanctuary Fortress is pretty independent and doesn't have much in the way of overlap outside of Luminoth turrets and the Harmony class drone, but they do have one exclusive minor entity to be seen here. Maintenance units are one of the few types of machines that never seem to have gone totally rogue during the Ing occupation of the Sanctuary Fortress, but it is also not totally certain if the Luminoth had much control over them near the end of the war with the Ing. These units, which are readily identified by the Dome Control Model, red central core and the 3 spindly, multi-joint appendages they use for their primary functions, as the name would imply, mainly spend their time performing minor maintenance tasks like repairs and data filing for the many machines and systems in place on the outside of the Sanctuary Fortress. They are completely harmless to others and have no real offense or defense to speak of, thus making them a benign presence compared to many of the machines within the fortress. Now, let's take a look at the more prominent entities that can be found within the Sanctuary Fortress. The Serenity class drone was used as a mobile drone for the Luminoth in order to take care of minor maintenance duties within the entirety of the Sanctuary Fortress. The machines themselves resemble small, semi-rounded rectangles with a black body casing and red circuit lines on the outside, with a series of small, barb-like appendages on the underside that act as tiny magnetic legs. The Ing never bothered to actually possess or destroy these machines, as the units are defenseless, cannot be eaten, and have nothing in the form of actual offense to work with. As such, they are one of the few machines built by Luminoth that survived the war intact, diligently completing the minor maintenance tasks they were assigned from the moment they were created, and only changing the course of action when they are reassigned or otherwise destroyed. Not surprisingly, this makes them an easy inclusion from threat level alpha, and can even be taken home if you're keen on having a sample of Luminoth tech that can be easily and safely worked with. The Octopede is a drone originally designed by Luminoth to act as a transport system for messages and other types of information between one part of the massive Sanctuary Fortress to another when direct digital communication was not possible. However, it was not too long after the war started the Ing learned how to corrupt the programming of these machines and turn them against the Luminoth, following their own set paths based on the desires of the Ing-controlled machines, and thus only delivering information to them, or sometimes even stealing it from the Luminoth without them even noticing until it was too late. Individual octopedes are somewhat weak on their own, and thus are designed to link together and travel as linear strands of 4 modules, crawling around ducts in the sides of circular corridors. In the latter case, they often operate as a pair of strands on opposite walls of the tunnels and generate an electrical node in the center of the tunnel that will electrocute anything that tries to get by them, requiring their destruction for progress to be made. However, this is not as easy as it sounds, as while the individual members of the octopedes are easily destroyed, they are also attached to each other through an electrical chain that can only maintain a stable form as long as the chain remains unbroken. If enough damage is inflicted on a single unit in an octopede line to the point where it becomes non-functional, the entire strand will disassemble and units will activate a self-destruct protocol that will cause them to violently explode a short time later. The fact that the modules will forcibly disconnect and bounce around on the ground for a little while before detonating only makes them that much more of a problem to avoid. Thankfully though, while this protocol might be good when it comes to destroying a single octopede in a chain without any connection to the others, if a weapon like the Dark Beam is used to destroy one of them, the dark energy will follow the electrical lines holding them together and destabilize it, effectively destroying the entire line instantly and thus making it easier to defeat them without normally having to back off after they start to spark and bounce around. Despite them acting more as traps to the unwise than true offensive threats, given they do not have a way to actually attack others directly, these machines can still be dangerous to approach because of their explosive nature, and in turn comfortably rest within threat level beta. The Resbit is a dangerous patrol drone created by Luminoth in order to protect the Sanctuary Fortress from the attacks of the Ing, and although they were no longer in the service of anyone towards the end of the war due to a lack of Luminoth to command them, they remained uncorrupted and still followed their duties to the letter before they ultimately shut down after the annihilation of Dark Aether. The Resbit is comprised of a trio of darkly colored robotic balls, two smaller ones that are armed with spikes that act as energy nodes, and a central core that is clearly marked with orange electromagnetic discharge ports. While the Resbit generally remains dormant in a special storage port built into the floors, walls, and platforms of the Sanctuary Fortress, the moment it detects movement of any kind in its vicinity, usually through the electrical signature given off by the creatures and machines, it will spring to life and begin to generate a series of orange-colored data screens the Resbit uses to analyze its target's moods and other functions, as the central core does not have all the equipment needed to interact with the physical world in a more direct fashion. While the main core is the weak point of the Resbit, it will usually raise a blue energy shield in front of it shortly after activating to reflect beam missile weapons away from its front, and while the shield is effectively impenetrable, it only exists as a flat screen, so the machine can be affected from the side or behind while it is active. In terms of offense, the Resbit is armed with several different weapons that it can use to attack and severely harm both living and mechanical life forms. After dropping its shield in preparation for an attack, the Resbit can use its two small energy nodes to link together and fire a laser across the area, or fire a series of rapid-fire energy cannon shots that can deal hefty damage to any target that isn't adequately armored. On the other hand, if the creature feels that it needs to take a more direct approach with the mechanical enemy, it can enter a temporary form where its body becomes so highly energized that it takes on a semi-maskless state where it cannot be targeted or really even hurt by any form of conventional weaponry. During this time, the machine will create a powerful virus and fire it at its targets encased in an energy projectile shell. The moment that the virus hits its intended mechanical target, it will upload itself into the systems and will disrupt the software and force them to reboot the systems, the vision and weapon systems being scrambled and rendered useless until they can restart and purge the virus from the systems. This is by far their most dangerous attack these machines possess, as even power suits are vulnerable to its effects and can leave the wearer weakened against further strikes. The Resbit is a surprisingly sturdy machine that can more than follow its duties when needed, so unless one can get a clear shot with an entangler shot to freeze them before shattering them with a missile, getting past one of these machines could take a while and result in a significant amount of damage to its attacker before the machine and its data screens destabilize and fall to the floor in pieces, in turn marking a clear place for it within threat level Gamma. Diligence-class drones were effectively the prototype of the Harmony-class drone, and were designed very much with the appearance and powers of the Scatter Bomb in mind. As with their successors, these creatures were designed to act as cleaning units that could use focus beams of electricity to forcibly remove rust and corrosion from surfaces, and were modified for war upon the arrival of the Ing, but they were ultimately outclassed by the Harmony units. Interestingly though, the Diligence-class drone's construction did give it the benefit of immunity to most forms of damage possessed by the Scatter Bomb, but its body is extremely weak to the effects of dark energy and can easily be killed with a few shots from the Dark Beam. This is further compounded by the fact that they often can only operate in much tighter corridors and tend to have limited movement aside from their rotation, plus small objects can actually roll through the energy beams they project from their forms, so it's difficult to assign them to anything higher than threat level Beta. In their war against the Ing on Aether, the Luminoth attempted to take Triclops that had been imported from Talon 4 and train them, but their simple intelligence and unchangeable behavior patterns left the Luminoth frustrated. In response, they decided to construct something to replace them, leading to the birth of their mechanical counterparts, the Mechlops. The Mechlops act just like the Triclops in every way, but they are better able to attract other objects in their mouths with electromagnetic snares that can attach to any metal surface with ease. While this machine served the Luminoth for a time, the Ing eventually learned how to hack into the machines and turn the creation on their makers. As a result, the Mechlops roamed the hallways of the Sanctuary Fortress in an attempt to remove any intruders into the area, but they proved to be of little consequence to the Hunter, as the machines retained the weakness to small explosives seeing their living counterparts, and are thus easily eliminated and ultimately deactivated entirely at the end of the war. As such, just as with the living counterparts, they are fairly easy to deal with if one has the right weaponry or otherwise able to hijack their systems to reduce their aggression levels, and thus belong within threat level Alpha. The Quads are a series of combat robots built by the Luminoth earlier in response to the loss of biological troops during the War of the Ing. These machines once served the Masters proudly and were a great addition to the army, but it did not take the Ing very long to figure out how to reprogram the machines, and thus were able to turn these creations against the Luminoth, helping to seal off the Sanctuary Fortress against their penetration of further living creatures. The Quads essentially consist of two main parts, the Quad Main Body, or Quad MB for short, and the Quad Command Module, or Quad CM, and each unit is capable of working independently or together as needed. The Quad MB consists of a small central base with 4 large metallic appendages that the machine uses to attack in close quarters. With the Quad CM attached, these legs cannot really do much on their own aside from move, but they can still lash out in close quarters with a vicious leg sweep in order to inflict melee damage. If the quad CM is destroyed while the quad MB is still functional, the legs can bring themselves together to a point and start spinning at high speeds like a top, generating an electrical barrier at the same time to inflict considerable electrical damage against anything that manages to hit it. In this state, the machines are effectively invulnerable to damage, but a strong kinetic impact such as from a boost ball strike can destabilize their movement and force them to crash into a wall. At this point, or while attached to the quad CM is firing a laser, the quad MB will have to vent heat in order to keep itself from overheating, exposing its vulnerable venting system. A kinetic strike from something like the boost ball can then be used to ram into the device and effectively destroy the quad MB's functionality. The quad CM, which not only controls the quad MB and uses it for basic locomotion, can fire a powerful laser while attached to the main body that can deal some minor damage and sweep around the immediate area in front of the machine for a good distance. If the quad MB is destroyed while the CM is still functional, however, the quad CM will rise and use electromagnetic propulsion drive to fly in the air for a short period of time. In this state, the quad CM will raise an energy shield and resort to firing projectiles from a small energy cannon installed in the center of the machine. The shields that they raise work just like those possessed by the Ink Smasher, and thus consist of either light or dark energy, so the opposite polarity beam can be used to destroy the shield and render the otherwise slightly armored machine vulnerable to attack. In most cases, it is recommended that the quad CM be destroyed instantly with something like a super missile, because while there might not be spare quad CM machines flying around, it is not uncommon to find spare quad MBs flying around, and a detached quad CM can reattach itself to a deactivated quad MB, and thus revitalize itself and force its opponents to continue to fight more MB units until the quad CM is destroyed. For these above reasons, these entities clearly belong in threat level Gamma, and should be avoided at all costs if an explorer does not have the means to quickly disable or otherwise destroy them entirely, and especially if there are spare parts around they could use to repair themselves with. The Dark Quad MB and CM were the result of indirectly possessing quads to direct them into battle, but these Darklings were a bit different in that they consisted of not just one, but two actual Ing specimens. This is because the Ing were unable to possess both units at the same time since they could exist as discrete entities, so they required the efforts of two different Ing in order to get the job done. As such, the Ing that was forced to possess the MB unit was usually a lesser Ing that must follow the orders of the Ing that possessed the Quad CM, which really seemed to be a problem since they were all working under the hive mentality as it was. Thankfully, these Darklings were very rare to come by, as most of them were destroyed prior to the arrival of the Hunter on Aether, and only had a little bit more durability than the normal forms, so they could be disposed of in a similar manner as the Light World counterparts, and turn occupying threat level Gamma with them. The Mechanobite is a robotic creature that was designed by Luminoth as a substitute for the Cenobite, a rare creature that went extinct as a result of the impact of Leviathan into Aether. The original creature in its metallic copy possessed a large geometric body with a four-sided triangle form at the top and an open flat form on the bottom, with spikes projecting out of the lower lip. The creatures only have a single pair of long, spindly legs and a single eye structure that serves as a visual tool for observing thermal radiation. In the case of the original Cenobite, the creature possessed considerable telekinetic powers and used its power to not only keep itself attached to walls and ceilings, but could focus its energy into its projectile attacks to make them hone in on their targets. Its main weapon was a spat globule filled with acid that could direct towards a target, and once the projectile burst and incapacitated their target, the Cenobite could swing right over to it and devour its meal in peace. Because they dwelled in tunnels and caverns, it was difficult to get past the monsters when they were in your way, and their armored bodies made it difficult to inflict any damage. The only way to destroy them was to target and strike both of their legs at the same time, which would damage their ability to use their telekinetic powers. With their main source of power disabled, Cenobites would act to self-destruct near the target to spray them with all of the acid left in their bodies, hopefully killing them fully in retaliation. The Mechanobite behaves in the exact same measure, with the only exception being that they use magnetism to connect themselves to walls and ceilings, and use a magnetic accelerator to fire projectiles that home in on targets possessing a metallic shell or armor suit of some sort. As with the living version of this creature, the only way to kill one of these machines is to target and destroy both of its legs at the same time, preferably with something like the Seeker missile launcher. Once the legs have been destroyed and they fall into the ground, Mechanobites will explode violently in self-defense, hoping to take down their attacker with them. Despite their volatile nature, the Mechanobite are some of the few machines in the Sanctuary Fortress that were never possessed by the Ing, and thus still serve their original masters since the moment of their creation, patrolling the corridors and shafts they were assigned to, and serving to keep the Ing and the Darklings out of those areas up until the machines were fully disabled at the end of the war. As a result of this, these entities are rather unlikely to show aggression in any creature that doesn't enter their immediate presence, but they can still be tricky to handle if their primary weakness cannot be properly targeted, thus limiting them to threat level beta. As its name might suggest, the Ing Smasher was the ultimate combat robot designed by the Luminoth to devastate the Ing in battle, and while they might not be the fastest of machines when it comes to walking and running, their sheer power more than makes them a serious threat to all. Ing Smashers are usually kept in protective stasis pods in order to conserve on power, but the moment they detect a serious intruder in the vicinity, or a creature that they otherwise do not recognize, but see as a threat based on the weaponry alone, these titans will come to life and will attack said targets ferociously until they are no more. The Ink Smasher possesses a heavily armored body built in a style that allowed it to be seen in the light suit that the hunter would eventually earn near the end of her journey on Aether, with 3 eyes on its face, a sturdy metallic torso, and arms with 2 massive orbs of metal in place of hands. The orbs of the arms of Ink Smashers are its primary means of offense, as the creature can energize them and slam them into the ground with such force that they send out massive shockwaves of electrical energy, mostly capable of dealing incredible damage to anything they touch if not jumped over, though they can also just swing them as weapons of blunt force trauma in close quarters. In addition, the Ink Smasher possesses a multi-port missile launcher attached to its left shoulder that can fire missile projectiles in rapid fashion to obliterate targets from afar, though the creature has to lean down on its orbs in order to properly aim the device, and the weapon system can actually be targeted separately to destroy it and limit the creature's long-range offense options. While the armor of the Ink Smasher is incredibly resilient and capable of taking quite a bit of punishment even from a weapon like the Dark Beam, these titans are able to protect themselves further by generating energy shields from the orbs that can make them immune to most kinds of damage. While the shield is active, the Ink Smasher will ram towards its target before temporarily dropping the shield and bludgeoning their target with extreme force. These shields can prove to be a problem to eliminate, but they're either constructed from dark or light energy, so it's possible to destabilize the shield and overload it with a beam of the opposite polarity. Doing so will stun the Ink Smasher for a few moments, making it possible to run away and catch one's breath before continuing the fight with them. The Ink Smasher is an extremely intelligent machine and can more than prove to be a dire threat to any fighter, but if they're really becoming a problem and need to be eliminated quickly, it is still possible to destroy them with a single blast from an extreme explosive weapon like a power bomb. Nonetheless, they are far and away some of the most powerful machines seen in any planetary system as individual soldiers, and thus more than earn a spot within threat level Delta. The Caretaker class drone was an experimental drone and combat robot designed by the Luminoth to guard the experimental energy chamber within the main research facility of the Sanctuary Fortress. The energy chamber that it protected was used by the Luminoth in order to test out different sources of power in an effort to make machines that are more efficient in terms of energy usage, and that allowed them to run for longer periods of time without needing to be repowered. The machine went unnoticed by the Ing or otherwise unpossessed, since it was effectively affixed to a shaft holding the chamber permanently, and energy conservation was not exactly an issue of much importance to them, so it was left to its own devices until the hunter was forced to battle and destroy the machine in order to make her way to where a screw attack upgrade was being held. The limited combat programming put into the machines limited its ability to intelligently attack somewhat, but it was still a powerful machine that is very difficult to damage without knowledge of its weaknesses. The machine used a series of electrically charged appendages to fight off the hunter as she rode around rings with spiral tracks and the energy chamber. She had to stay on these rails as much as she could, as falling down onto the floor below would have given the machine a chance to electrify the floor and heavily damage her in turn. As electrical arms came down and grinded against the tracks in an attempt to hurt her, the machine had to lower a series of red bar-shaped detection units in order to gauge her precise location, as the drones had no other form of input to allow it to see where she was at. Using the boost ball, the hunter was able to boost into and destroy these sensors, eventually forcing the machine to reveal its core control module as it tried to repair its broken sensors. Crashing into the central control core damaged the machine and forced it to move up in the shaft and retreat, allowing the hunter to follow it up to the next level in its structure. She had to accomplish this 2 more times, with the spider ball tracks being split into 2 and finally 3 separate pieces, but she was nonetheless able to avoid its attacks long enough to deal critical damage to the control core, destroying it and turn the rest of the Caretaker class drone in turn. It is unknown if the remaining Luminoth will ever rebuild this machine, but with time it is possible that this otherwise unique drone may yet see the light of day again in the Sanctuary Fortress, and given its surprising effectiveness in actually protecting itself, it is easy to assign it to threat level Gamma. Dark War Wasps were the result of normal War Wasps being possessed by Ing and converted into Darklings. The Ing seem to favor these creatures' swift movements and vicious behavior, making them a prime target for young Ing that are looking to join the war effort and prove themselves to the rest of the hive. The numerous attacks that they had at their disposal and their sheer agility made them very easy to control, even if they were still only mildly more difficult to kill than the light world counterpart. Young Ing that proved themselves to be worthwhile during the stint in this form were often granted the right to infect and take over much larger creatures in time, though this usually resulted in the death of their former host when the creature removed themselves from the original body. Thankfully, these vicious little monsters were still not that dangerous compared to many other Darklings that the Ing had created, and they were rendered completely extinct in recent times as a result of the total collapse of Dark Aether, so it was rather easy to assign them to threat level Alpha. The Spider Guardian was a Darkling created when the Warrior Ing that took the Hunter Spider Ball upgrade in Dark Aether possessed the body of a Pillbug, granting it the power to run on magnetically charged spider tracks and use the power of electricity to deal damage. The creature's body had been so highly energized by feeding on the energy conduits in the dynamo works of the Sanctuary Fortress that it was effectively immune to all forms of direct damage, though it could be stunned in a way. The Darkling generated a massive energy shield around his body that made it very difficult to even get near it without taking damage, and the color of the field was directly correlated with the movement speed of the beast. In short, it would move about as fast as a normal pillbug when the shield was blue, slower when it was green, and faster when it was red. Hitting it with morph ball bombs would eventually cause the shields to change color until it hit green. At this point, the electromagnetic signature of the creature would match that of the machinery contained within the Dynamo Works where it battled the Hunter in morph ball form, and thus they caused some platforms to be extended, allowing the Hunter to gain access to some of the bomb slots hidden there that could raise certain gates. The purpose of this was to actually direct the Darkling to blindly charge straight into the power conduits that had been feeding on to overload its body with electricity, severely damaging it in the process. This task became increasingly difficult as the layouts of the room they fought in changed and required tactics to be altered on the fly, but the Hunter was eventually able to get the beast to ram into a total of 6 power conduits with its red shield up, overloading it and its ink possessor to the point of cellular destabilization and death. While this small creature might not seem like it was that much of a massive threat, given its relatively small size compared to other Darklings, its capacity to seemingly shrug off damage from most weapons nonetheless made it a formidable foe whose own environment had to be used against it to claim victory, and thus clearly belongs within threat level Gamma. After restoring the light of Aether to the energy control of Aegon Waste and traveling into the underwater areas of Torvus Bog, the Hunter was greeted with a horrific sight when, in the training chamber of the Hydrodynamo Station, Dark Samus appeared from little wisps of Phazon in the air. Despite seemingly being destroyed in their account on Aegon Waste, the Fiend had brought herself back to life and was back on track to absorb as much Phazon as she possibly could find. The Hunter would not encounter her again until she entered the area transport station of the Sanctuary Fortress, but this wait was long overdue as Dark Samus had absorbed tremendous amounts of energy into her body and had grown far, far stronger than she'd ever been before. In this form, Dark Samus retained the same basic attacks and energization patterns as before, but she also brought a couple of new tricks to the table. For one thing, she had developed the power to use not one but 2 different charge beam attacks. One fired a thin laser of Phazon energy that she would then sweep across the breadth of the elevator in airy access, and eventually the area when the elevator reached the top of the shaft, where the 2 entities were fighting, while the other had a hunk of Phazon that could encapsulate the Hunter instantly in the material and severely hurt her until she broke free of its restraints. In addition, the monster had gained the ability to use the boost ball and could enter use it indefinitely to crash into the pillars and the walls of the elevator until they disengaged the morph ball form and attack with a different weapon. Lastly, Dark Samus had gained the capacity to use optical camouflage in order to render herself invisible, but she could still be tracked using Dark Visor technology. Overall, Dark Samus proved to be just as terrifying as she had been the first time her and the Hunter had fought, but with the power of weapons like the Dark Beam on the latter side, the monster was eventually defeated once more. Racked in agony and confusion, Dark Samus blasted away part of the elevator's screen glass in the area and, in need of a quick way to escape, let herself fall off the edge of the area, disintegrating into a shower of Phazon particles once more. Even though this fight would end the same as the first one did, the massive increase in both overall power and special weapons and attributes made this version of the Dark Hunter a serious step up, and thus best classified within threat level Delta. Now that we've taken a thorough look at the Light World part of Sanctuary Fortress, it is now time to turn our attention to its former Dark counterpart, and the only part of Dark Aether the Luminoth were never able to fully secure in war, the Ing Hive. The Ing Hive was without a doubt the most important site of Ing activity as it was the place where all Ing were born, additionally serving as the Dark World equivalent of the Sanctuary Fortress. The technological marvels of Luminoth were paid little attention to here, as the Ing roamed the futuristic corridors and hallways simply to keep a vigilant watch over the area, making sure that no being from the Light World ever got the chance to attack their largest base. Though the Luminoth had beaten back the armies of the Ing in other places on several occasions, not once did the Ing Hive ever fall to their might, and thus the armies of the Ing only continued to regenerate while those of Luminoth dwindled until almost none of them were left. It was here that the Hunter came into contact with the giant quad and overall ultimate war machine of the Luminoth, Quadraxis, and destroyed the corrupted machine in the Ing Hive temple and stole the energy back from the Ing Hive energy controller. Additionally, this area served as a holding location for 2 Sky Temple keys that are located by Luminoth key bearers Jaceers, who died trying to bring reinforcements to the ambushed key bearers in the time of need, and Seerich, who died in hand-to-hand combat with the Ing after running out of ammunition, but whom were unable to make it back to the entrance of the Sky Temple to put them back in their proper place. It should be known that this land is home to Inglets, Warrior Ing, Hunter Ing, Night Barbs, and Darkling Tentacles, and even Dark Preeds, among other entities previously covered. As we have before then, let's first take a look at the Darklings that are seemingly exclusive to this Dark Fortress. Dark Diligence drones were relatively rare creatures, even the nightmare that was Dark Aether, and were only possessed by the Ing on a few small occasions, though they probably would have liked to have had more. To the Ing, the small size and durability of these units made them excellent scouts that could go to places and through small openings that larger Ing could not pass through, making them the perfect creatures to use in an area as large as the Sanctuary Fortress. Though they were all destroyed along with Dark Aether at the end of the war, while alive, these creatures were effectively invulnerable to all forms of damage and could produce multiple trios of energy streams to make it impossible to simply roll right by them like with their light mode counterparts. Even so, just like all Darklings, they retained a weakness to light energy and could still be destroyed with a charged shot from the light beam. This continued weakness to energy as a defense made them pretty easy to eliminate as long as light energy could be harnessed against them in a weaponized format, thus limiting them to threat level beta. Dark Ink Smashers, which were the result of normal Ink Smashers being possessed by the Ink and converted into Darklings, were virtually identical to light world counterparts and were created shortly after the Ink learned how to possess the minds of intelligent machines. The Ink Smashers were seen as the ultimate prize, as their power was so great that even the creators could not stand much of a chance of defeating them with the tables turned. Thankfully, Dark Ink Smashers were relatively rare because not many of the originals were actually built, but while they might have been weak to the same general tactics as their counterparts, their weakness to light energy really needed to be taken advantage of to defeat them. Otherwise, they could easily prove to be too much to handle with just a little bit of extra power and defense that comes with Darkling formation, though an extreme explosive like a power bomb will still do the job in a hurry. Not surprisingly, this rendered them just as dangerous as normal Ink Smashers with added durability to make them even more difficult to defeat, and are thus best placed within threat level Delta. Next, we have a few entries for the Ink that are unique to this area. The Ingworm cache was not really a storage pod at all, but a type of Ink of low rank that was forced to act as a living storage unit for use by the rest of its kind and the Darklings in the Sky Temple and Ink Hive. The mass that made up this storage pod came from a series of small Ingworms that tightly weaved themselves together to form a solid sheet that protected certain goods that the Ink might have had a use for in the future. Sadly, these creatures do not have the ability to attack or defend themselves and had very weak defenses, so sustained fire can easily destroy them and demonstrate where they were given the lowly status of storage container by the Ink in the first place. The Ink larva swarm constituted the lowest end of the Ink hierarchy in that they were infant Ink that had yet to mature into any sort of form at all. These flat, greasy-looking creatures had a solid blue-black body color, and the Ink's trademark bright red-orange cluster of sensory cells, though only pure red in their infant state, and were rather small in size, making it easy for an individual to slip by a larger creature unnoticed. These beasts had very little to offer in the way of actual attack power, thus forcing them to hunt much smaller creatures that were otherwise invisible to the naked eye for sustenance, and their flaccid bodies were so weak that exposure to direct light and the real method of attacking, a simple tackle, were enough to kill them. As such, these creatures tended to travel in large groups in order to protect as many of their kind as possible, and while they might have been hard to come by outside the Ink Hive, and only a few ever managed to make it to adulthood, the few that did were usually quite cunning and more than capable of serving their Ink's superiors in battle. That said, they really couldn't do much in the way of harm to larger creatures until they reached some sense of adolescence at the very least, and thus are best defined within threat level Alpha. Ink Storms were a rare type of Ink that did not really have the capacity to attack anything directly, but were nonetheless some of the most dangerous Ink that one could possibly encounter. The Ink Storm itself was comprised of hundreds of tiny spherical ink particles with a raised spiky outer texture that floated about an area and really did nothing to directly help the Horde, feeding solely on dark energy for fuel. However, this did not make them useless, as a special power made them some of the best gatekeepers that the Ink had access to. These little monsters radiated a destructive energy force that had the effect of rapidly destabilizing and stripping the molecules off of non-Darkling and Ink creatures, and while this power might only have been enough to cause some slight damage against a target with a single particle, the presence of hundreds of these monsters in an enclosed space accelerated the damage they could do so much that they could easily break down the strongest of metals in seconds, making those with any type of armor or no armor at all extremely vulnerable to rapid and likely lethal damage. There was really nothing that could be done to kill these things as a result of their small size, but they still shared the same weakness to light as other members of the Ink Horde, and thus could not come into contact with anything related to the light of Aether without dying instantly, making the light suit the only upgrade that could render someone completely immune to their effects. As it stood otherwise, however, the sheer destructive potential of these swarms made them a terrifying presence for anyone to have to face, no matter how heavily armored they might have otherwise been, in turn making them more than worthy to occupy threat level Delta, with few other forces on Dark Aether capable of actually matching the harm they could do. And finally, we have come to the final guardian the Hunter had to eliminate in order to help restore power to the Light World's Sanctuary Fortress. Quadraxis was the ultimate robot built by the Luminoth, and while it may have served them well as a war machine and could have potentially turned the war in their favor, the Luminoth were unable to activate the machine before the Ink came along and made it their puppet against the Hunter. Compared to the other quad units in the Sanctuary Fortress, Quadraxis was a titanic quad robot, the likes of which had never been seen before by the Hunter, and its entire frame was heavily reinforced and practically immune to damage of any type, save for a few vital weak points on its body. The machine had thick glass covering all of its legs, and its head module was armed to the teeth with an assortment of weapons, including a machine gun, missile launcher system, and the ability to use regular and charged shots of the Annihilator beam. In addition, the creature could rotate its main body at extremely high speeds just like the Quad MB, creating a massive cyclone of sorts that could easily pull the hunter in for a high-speed collision, though this attack could be destabilized by firing repeatedly at the center mass of the body's main legs. Furthermore, each of Quadrax's limbs had an energy charge to the center of each foot, and if the machine wished to, it could slam a single leg to create an energy shockwave on the ground, or even make a short hop with all 4 legs to send a quartet of energy waves at the hunter, though repeated strikes with the boost ball could disable this weapon. As mentioned before, Quadrax is effectively impervious to all forms of damage as a result of its thick armor, but the machine did have one vital weak point: its knees. Because of the sheer mass of the machine, the knee joints of the robot had to be reinforced with ultra-thick glass in order to keep the joints from breaking as the machine moved around. Though these joints remained indestructible most of the time, every once in a while the creature would experience an energy surge due to a mechanical defect that they never thought to try and correct. This would cause the joint to flash blue at the point as the energy surge coursing through it would render the joint unstable, signaling that it was vulnerable to attack. The hunter was able to use this to her advantage to ultimately destroy all the machine's leg joints, with it only growing more aggressive as each joint was destroyed, resulting in a short circuit in the base connecting the head module of Quadraxis to the main body, and thus rendering the damaged main body inoperable. However, even though the main body of Quadraxis may have been disabled, the head module of the machine was still operational and had access to all of its major projectile attacks. In this state, the head module was protected by an energy field that made it impossible to damage, and it was still receiving tactical commands from the main body via hypersonic transmissions. The hunter was able to use her echo device in order to see these signals and use it to target the sonic antenna sticking out of the main body, disrupting its signal in the process and causing the shielded head module to be stunned. The stunned head module extended a trio of sonic receptors from its body to try and re-establish a connection with the main body, but just as with before, she was able to target these receptors and destroy them one by one, limiting the head module's communication abilities. While it started to release dark quads in order to keep itself protected from attack while re-establish its energy shield, the hunter was able to take down all 3 receptors, mainly with the light beam as it had a great effect on the monster, and ultimately caused the head module to short circuit. The head module crashed into all of the main body's legs and broke the glass protecting them, as well as the glass on its own head, revealing a pair of energy ports on the head module that were just perfect for a morph ball. After inflicting enough damage, the hunter was able to finally stun the head module into a period of stasis, where it just floated around in the air past the legs of the main body. With this opportunity present, the hunter used her spider ball upgrade to climb up the magnetic tracks in the legs of the main body and used the boost ball to rocket off the leg when the head module flew by, sticking to the magnetic surface of its exposed hull and laying a morph ball bomb in each of the ports one at a time. This final assault was enough to cause the head module to short circuit beyond reasonable recovery and impact the ground of the Hive Temple, exploding shortly afterwards. To try and sum up the sheer amount of power this machine truly had access to is a fool's errand, even with all recovered recorded data on the fight with it. And needless to say, it was a weapon that nothing short of the highest grade military weaponry could ever be able to even put a scratch on. As such, as the most powerful weapon ever built by the Luminoth, it more than deserves a place within threat level Epsilon, and it is a miracle for many that another one of its kind had not been built before the end of the Luminoth's war with the Ying. The Sanctuary Fortress is a fortification unlike any other on planet Aether, and is a testament to both the technological marvels of the Luminoth race and the extreme lengths they went to in order to defend their cliffside home here from the forces of the Ying. While the many war machines that are built here were designed to help them fight off the Ying, having their creations turn against them more than made this location a terrible and terrifying place for anyone to step foot within, and given that the entire facility is located in the highest mountain peaks of the planet, it is a hazard to equally traverse outside, with massive pitfalls and open canyons that render all but the most agile of explorers sitting ducks among the precarious pathways still left from the Ying's attacks on the facility. The environment itself is the least of one's worries given the killer machines that still patrol its hallways and remote corridors, so if one really wishes to explore the fortress to the utmost, extreme caution is recommended in doing so. Many of the Luminoth's creations have been deactivated since the end of the Aether crisis, but the few that still roam the halls are extremely dangerous and only worth confronting if an explorer has the firepower needed to make a trip worth it to see the sights of the planet and the vast cities that lay beneath it on the surface far below. That wraps up this video on the Sanctuary Fortress in Aether, and I hope this will all prove to be useful for those that are looking to take a visit there sometime in the future. With this jog through the hallowed halls of this technological marvel, we have only one last place to look at in our tour of Aether, and it's where the hunter made her last stand against the forces of the Ying. Tune in for our next info video as we take a look at the Ying's greatest and final stronghold, the Sky Temple and the grounds surrounding it. Thank you for reaching the end of this presentation. While we might not always get along, the Space Pirates and myself, in whatever capacity we can manage, are dedicated to analyzing and examining the life forms of many different worlds, extant and extinct, to show the great variety of life that exists out within the greater cosmos. If you enjoyed this info video and would like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more information. We'll do our best to keep pumping out data so the greater public has an understanding of what to expect when exploring alien planets and their denizens. With that, have a safe journey, and have your bribes prepared beforehand if you happen to come near our territory.